It's only 1 week away from BSDCan. Both Allan and I are excited to meet some of you in person. However, the show keeps on chugging, and this week we have an interview with Kristof Provost to tell us about PF improvements in FreeBSD. That, plus of course the latest news here on your place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 144, The PF Life, recorded June 1st, 2016. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Allan Jude.
We're glad to have you guys with us this week. We got an exciting episode. Of course, we're only a week away from BSDCan at this point, so looking forward to that.
Yes.
Looking forward to that. So much to do and so little time before we go, though.
I gotta start packing just so I remember to bring. It's like I want to bring all my little Onion Omega MIPS devices. I have my NVIDIA Jetson thing I want to try to play with.
Okay.
And it's like, I have these Pis that got this close to working to being video streaming devices.
See, and then somebody will fix them this year.
Yep.
Well, the most important thing, though, did you get your new T-shirt?
Not yet. Still waiting.
Okay, mine came on Tuesday,
Nice.
so I have just yesterday. So I have it. It's there, and hopefully everyone else's is showing up soon. We'll have a lot of people wearing those at BSDCan. That ought to be good.
I have some of the old ones still, so I can do that.
What was
I
that?
have at least one of the old ones for the auction as well. The one with the full lineup or whatever.
Good deal. Good deal. Well, anyway, we'll look forward to seeing many of you out there. And for the rest of you who couldn't make it, hey, sorry, maybe next time we'll have to catch you there. But it should be a lot of fun. So looking forward to doing that. But of course, we got plenty of show and lots of news to get into this week. So we're going to dive right into that. So first up, we're starting with Theo DeRat's actually done some cool stuff. He did a presentation recently over at .security 2016. And of course, if you're interested in privilege separation or security in general, and if so, of course, this is going to be a treat for you because we have not only the video, but the slides as well from his talk. So specifically the talk slides, he starts taking a look at Pledge, of course, which funny enough, if you actually look at the slides, I hope there's no copyright issues with the pictures of the Pledge cleaner on the side there. Right? We'll let
I think
that
it's fair use to just use a little spray can.
Right. But he goes through a little bit about how Pledge works and, of course, how their NTP daemon uses it internally. But some of the interesting tidbits, though, that he revealed in the talk, of course, after he goes through some of the internals of how Pledge works, Theo revealed that about 10% of the programs that they've pledged so far were found to be trying to do actions that were outside of their security scope. So very naughty. So 10%, ouch, that's no good. But hey, that's a good thing. They're finding it and fixing that. So also at the end of the talk, he mentioned on the future side, they're mentioning going back and looking at OpenSSH's privilege separation as well. Apparently, there's some much needed love that needs to happen there to fix some OpenSSH.
OpenSSH got privilege separation in like 2003 or something.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
So it's been a while. I'm sure it's due for a refresh. So that, and he also mentioned in the slides here working with other OSs that may want Pledge support as well, which frankly I think that would complement a lot of the other BSDs very well. So hopefully we'll see that migrate and make its way into other systems also. So definitely some good stuff. Of course, we have the link to the video up on YouTube if you'd like to watch that. Of course, wait until you're done watching us first, but then you'll have to check that out next and grab his slides. Lots of good information there. Okay, so moving into some new stuff that's been landing in upstream FreeBSD. I guess this is the big one we've been waiting for.
Yes.
Beehive now has Uefi Usb support, which is the graphics output protocol for those who don't know. And of course, part of that also provides an internal VNC server, which we saw demoed some of in Tokyo when we were out there a while back. So tell us a little bit about that, Allan. What exactly has landed and where and all that?
Right. So this isn't actually in FreeBSD head yet. It's not in 11, but it should land in time for FreeBSD 11.0's release. But right now it's in the a project branch called, I think, Projects Beehive Graphics. But instead of doing the whole, an entire copy of FreeBSD checked into that project branch, it's just the Beehive directory. So what you can do is take your latest 11 snapshot or your PCBSD 11 program or whatever, run these 3 commands on it here, check out just that directory, and then tell make, hey, build this, but find the rest of everything in user source, and boom, you can install the new Beehive binary, and you have support for all of this. So that
is pretty slick.
All of this code doesn't actually live in the kernel side of Beehive. It's all in the user land because it's just the graphics emulation. So basically what this adds is, like you mentioned, basically a virtual graphics card where instead of outputting to a monitor or to a window in X or something, it outputs to a VNC server. So a little VNC server is built into Beehive, and it sits there listening on a port if you configure it, and then you can VNC into it and see everything.
Okay. I'm just looking over the notes here. They said they tested tight VNC, tighter VNC, real VNC, but they said the OS X VNC client does not work. So I wonder what the deal is with that. But either way, there's some really good stuff here. He lists all the resolutions that are supported, so all the way up to 1080p pretty much.
Well, actually even higher at 1920 by 1200.
By 1200, that's right. Okay.
Now, eventually it will support just random resolutions, but right now it's limited to this list, which is 640 by 480, 800 by 600, all the standard resolutions you might want to use. So it probably covers all your cases anyway. Interestingly, it also has the wait option. So when you specify the frame buffer and say, listen on VNC on this port, you can also specify wait, and Beehive won't actually start booting the OS until you connect. So that you can, if you need to, say, interrupt booting of Windows to get to safe mode or something, you can tell it, hey, don't actually start until this. Or I think...
Oh, that's really handy.
Even if you're installing off the ISO, by default, it's like if you don't press escape within 5 seconds, it doesn't actually boot the ISO, right? And so this way you can have it wait until you connect and then start booting so that you can do that.
Yeah, that's really good. I know, like, if you have to reload the Windows... ISO in a disk or in a VM that's already been installed, it has you have to press a key or press space within 3 seconds to boot it or whatever.
All that kind of stuff, yep.
Yeah, that's no fun.
It also introduces XHCI, which is basically USB 3 emulation, and provides a tablet backend for that. So that's how you, with the VNC, how you get very, very accurate mouse movement so that your mouse always tracks exactly where it is in VNC.
Sure.
But that doesn't work with Windows 7 or, old OSs that don't have built-in USB 3. So there's also fallback to a PS2 style mouse. But that'll have the typical VNC problem of the mouse cursor not necessarily matching up with your mouse cursor. But as long as you're using something newer, it'll be fine. And they also have the PS2 keyboard so that you can emulate a keyboard. Again, moving away from having only serial console. So, having those basic devices will make a really big difference now. And yeah.
I guess I don't have to do any serial console installs anymore. Okay.
And the code's been tested. They've booted Windows 7, Windows 8, 8.1, Windows 10, Server 2012, Server 2016, Ubuntu 15.10, and FreeBSD 10.3 and 11. And they've all worked very nicely.
That's very slick, very slick. Yeah. So, of course, this is all EFI based. So you'll need to have a OS which is capable of booting in UEFI to make this work. But still, this is fantastic. So pretty much anything modern should be good to go.
There's a newer firmware image, and basically you specify that. This is also moving towards the idea that you won't have to have the 2 separate commands for Beehive anymore. Instead of running grub-beehive or beehive-grub or whatever, or beehive load and then beehive, it's all one command by just specifying the boot ROM via the EFI image.
Well, the grub beehive was always kind of just a Band-Aid to get us there. This was always the long-term goal.
The long-term goal is one command to do it all. And it's, ready to go. There's example commands in here. We have a link in the show notes to a blog post from a user that's been using it. If you want to get a little bit more info on that. I'm not sure how much difference there is in what's in head and what's there yet, but... it's possible this could get ported back to the stable 10 branch as well, if people needed it there. But 11's coming out soon, and this should be in it, and it should be very fun.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, looking forward to playing with that. I know a lot of people have been talking about it already, so this has been a long time coming. Okay, so speaking of FreeBSD Head, this one actually has landed already in FreeBSD Head, but another long-awaited utility, Zfs D, has finally shown up, and that's just slipped in just in time. So that's going to be in 11.0. But for those who don't know, Zfs D is basically your daemon that does all the logic that necessarily the kernel doesn't necessarily do to make things like hot spares work properly.
Yes.
In other words, you have a spare sitting there, and it was great, but it didn't actually go into the pool and replace anything.
Yeah.
Like you still had to manually do it, which kind of sucks.
So it's basically the missing pieces to give us full functionality in ZFS. So Zfs D attempts to resolve ZFS faults that the kernel can't resolve by itself. It listens to devctl notifications, which is how the kernel tells userland about events such as I/O errors or disk removals. Zfs D then attempts to resolve these faults by activating or deactivating hot spares and onlining any offline VDEVs. So the administrator never actually interacts directly with Zfs D. Instead, they control its behavior indirectly by just setting properties on their ZFS pool. There are two ways to influence Zfs D. The first is by adding hot spares to your pool, and and then the other is with the properties, but currently the only property that does anything is auto replace. So if you turn that on, then Zfs D does stuff, and if you don't, then it doesn't.
So is Zfs D automatically turned on by default, or do we have to set that in rc.conf?
I'm not sure. I think you'll have to enable it, although maybe it will come in automatically if you have ZFS_enable equals yes. I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that one.
Something to look at.
So what does it do? So if a device is removed from your system, when a leaf VDEV disappears, Zfs D will automatically activate any hot spares you have available. So a disk drops out of your pool, and it's like, oh no, that's a bad thing. It's like, oh, you have a hot spare, let me swap that in for you. Done. If a new disk arrives, so when a new geom device appears, Zfs D will attempt to read its ZFS label. So if it has one. If the ZFS label matches a previously removed VDEV, so if you just pulled the wrong drive out of your pool and then slide it back in, it'll be like, oh, I'll just online that for you and cancel the hot spare replacement, and you're good to go. And once the resilvering completes, it will deactivate the hot spare that it attached. Now, if you just pulled the drive out for a couple seconds and put it back in, the resilver is only going to take a couple seconds because ZFS is smart about it, right? But, if it was offline for longer, it'll take a little bit longer, and you have the hot spare protecting you in the meantime. If the new device has no ZFS label, so it wasn't part of the pool before,
you replaced it,
but its physical path matches the physical path of a previously removed device on an active pool, then that pool has auto replace set to true or on. Then Zfs D will replace the missing VDEV with the newly arrived device. Once resilvering completes, any active hot spare will detach automatically.
Nice.
So if the new drive is in the same slot in your disk array, then it will replace the drive that used to be in that slot. So if you have a disk that dies and you pull it out and you put in a fresh disk in that slot, it will automatically make it part of the pool for you. If you stick a new disk in a different slot, it won't.
Interesting. So these are my pool slots, and then you have other slots assigned. That's nice.
Right, it's just so that if you do attach an extra disk, like say you stick in a USB stick, you don't want to try to attach it to your pool.
Yeah.
If a VDEV degraded or faults event, so if a VDEV becomes degraded or faulted, or has more than 50 I/O errors in 60 seconds, or more than 50 checksum errors in 60 seconds, then Zfs D will automatically mark that VDEV as faulted. ZFS will no longer issue any I/Os to that device, and Zfs D will activate a hot spare to replace it. Nice. So, if a disk starts being bad and throwing huge numbers of errors, it gets replaced with a hot spare instead of slowing down your pool. If Zfs D detects any drive going bad, it replaces it and lets you clean up the bad disk later. Spare addition. If the administrator adds a new hot spare to a pool that is already degraded, it will automatically activate the spare as soon as one shows up. That also means that if you have multiple pools or multiple root VDEVs or whatever, and a hot spare was in use and it was replacing a drive that got offline, did you re-online that drive, and the hot spare goes back into the pool, it'll automatically come back, go back and replace the other failing device too. So it automatically reactivates hot spares that have become free. Also, when a resilver completes, it'll detach the hot spare and return it to the ready pool to save somebody else in the future. And physical path changes. If the physical path to an existing disk changes, Zfs D will attempt to replace any missing disks with the same physical path. Mm-hmm. So if you move disks around and then plug in a new disk, if it's already labeled, it will use it to also bring other things back online. So if the memory gets all messed up because of a reboot or whatever, it's still going to find your stuff and bring it back online.
Does it automatically shoot emails out and stuff too, like to root saying?
So. It does log stuff, so you could probably configure it to do that. I don't know specifically.
Yeah, because I'd kind of like to get the email all of a sudden, like, "Hey, I took this disk offline."
Yeah, it definitely logs a bunch of stuff, so you can do it. By default, Zfs D _enable is not set, and you'll have to turn it on. See that here in the commit message.
Cool. Well, hey, that's going to be fun. Some more good stuff. Man, 11 just can't come soon enough. There's just so much new awesomeness in it. So definitely going to be an exciting .0 release. Okay, so moving on here. So WXRX. So, of course, we've talked about this a little bit in the past. So a refresher for those who haven't maybe seen those episodes yet. But that's, of course, the idea of memory being writable and executable at the same time. That's kind of a no-no. Well, of course, this is a major security no-no. And, of course, it's now no more on OpenBSD. Theo's just committed a change which now prevents violations of this policy. So a couple quotes from the commit log here. He said, WXRX violations are no longer permitted by default. A kernel log message is generated, and mprotect and mmap return E not supported. If the sysctl flag current WX abort is set, then a sig abort occurs instead and allows you to use then GDP or use core dump and get a dump file on that, and you can go look at it later to see what happened. But interestingly enough, though, they do point out there's still going to be a few cases where you might need WXRX, which Theo points out can be enabled now on a per file system basis. So the reasons why, he says, WXRX violating programs can be permitted on a file system or NFS file system basis using the WX allowed mount option. He said, one day far in the future, upstream software developers will understand that WXRX violations are a tremendously risky practice, and that style of programming will be banished outright. But until then, we recommend most users need to use the WX allowed option in the user local file system. At least your other file systems don't permit such programs. So I guess stuff you're going to install from ports or packages, you may still need to turn that on. But I think this is actually really great because now users can begin doing some auditing of programs by turning that flag off. You can see what breaks and out of your ports collection or whatever and start making noise to the upstream folks like, hey, this should be addressed. These programs are dying on OpenBSD with all the security turned on. So definitely good stuff, and that looks really interesting. I guess that'll be for...
per file system is definitely the right way to enable that feature. I like that idea.
For sure. No, I agree. I think that's definitely the way to go. So we will, of course, keep an eye on that and see what happens in the future. And like I said, hopefully it just encourages some upstream folks to say, ooh, I ran this on OpenBSD and it failed. So we need to look at why and get that fixed. Okay, so we're going to head over to an interview here in just a moment with Kristof, so you'll want to stick around for that. But really quick, before we do, of course, the first sponsor this week, which is going to be IX Systems, and the website for that, ixsystems.com/BSD Now. Of course, you can go there and put your info in, get in touch with one of their sales engineers right away, and they can help you figure out whatever the next system is you need, what kind of hardware would best work for it, how you should have it configured. Do I want the ZA pool laid out this way, or maybe this way, or where should I put more money in so I get more bang for my buck? So, of course, talk to those guys and tell them what you need. And because it's IX, everything's kind of the white glove treatment. And, of course, they can get you the latest and greatest Intel processors. Yes. So any kind of awesomeness that Intel's maybe just rolling out, IX is pretty good about being able to pick those up for you right away. And that goes all the way down to, the little atoms they use to build their FreeNAS minis, which have ECC memory, the whole 9 yards, all the way up to the powerhouse systems we've seen them build in the past. So
crazy things I've seen.
Yeah, they can kind of they can kind of run the gamut. I mean, we've seen all kinds of stuff on the assembly line there. Again, all the way down to the minis. We've seen workstations, and then we've seen these massive systems with just, petabytes of storage. So they can do it all. But definitely get in touch with them because they love hearing from our listeners. And, of course, we love hearing your IX stories as well. So next time you need to order some gear, definitely get in touch with IX. Anything you want to add for that,
no,
Alan?
I just think it's, I'm glad that I shopped there. Because,
That's right.
It came in handy, actually. It's something we'll talk about next week is a commit Colin Percival did, and he needed to test it on newer hardware. And it turns out I had at least one of every different thing.
Hey, that worked. Well, and something we don't really mention a lot on the IX side is their support of open source. And we probably should stress this more because we're a BSD show. We talk a lot about open source,
Yes,
right?
and they support
IX is one of those, right? IX is one of those companies where they actually know what open source is, and B, actually support it. So that goes to backing things like FreeNAS, PCBSD, and other open source projects, going to trade shows, and making sure the FreeBSD booth gets put up, and just all those little things
making
they do.
Sure
that
BSDCan happens.
Yes, sponsoring those kind of events so that it happens for the community as a whole. I don't think they get necessarily enough props for that, but you really should look at it. I mean, a lot of those companies you buy stuff from, they may not even know what open source is, much less actively support it. So it's good to see a hardware vendor that does that. So, of course, if that's important to you, maybe you should take a look at buying from IX for your next system. Well, we're joined today by Kristof, who's a FreeBSD developer. And hey, first of all, thanks for taking the time to do this.
Glad to be here.
I know it's BSDCan. You could be doing more interesting things, but hey,
yes,
we're glad to do this for people who like to watch.
I enjoy the show.
So I don't think we've had you on before, right?
No,
this is the first timer, so
yes,
you get the special treatment.
Be gentle.
We will be very gentle. But the first thing we ask for newcomers is give us a little about your story. How did you first get involved and find your way to BSD?
The short story is because it didn't work.
Oh, okay. That's a good way, I guess.
Yes. Many years ago when I was younger, I wanted to play with embedded systems. And I found a little board with a Marvell CPU on it to play with.
Okay.
Build a Linux kernel, run that on it. That works. Well, that's kind of boring.
Sure.
So let's try this FreeBSD thing. So I try FreeBSD and the network doesn't work. Why is that? And then I spent some amount of time, a lot more than it should have taken, but some amount of time debugging that one. And I've been finding bugs ever since.
Okay. So your problem solver, like you
or possibly creator, that depends on who you ask. Yes, people do. I'm sorry that I can't get around to as many as I would like to, but real life happens.
We all have this time problem, which is what I found.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, we know you work on PF, so we're here to talk a little about that. So tell us, I guess, how'd you get involved with PF? What took you from network driver to that?
I played with PF for a bit as a firewall, switched from IPFW for reasons that I can't even remember, and then discovered that this fragmentation thing doesn't work. That's kind of annoying.
Another problem.
So PF didn't handle IPv6 fragments, and it sort of annoyed me, and I decided this can't be hard to fix.
Yeah.
I wish somebody had told me that actually it is. So I worked on that for a bit, submitted patches, got people to look at them and go, this is wrong, you should do this instead. Got people to test them and shout at me when it crashed their router in the middle of the day or something. And then eventually got them merged. And then actually last year at Asia BSDCan, I got made, how did he put it, an offer I couldn't refuse by George.
Yes.
And I've been a committer ever since.
Okay. So no threats of physical violence or anything? Or?
No.
Okay.
George is always very friendly.
Yes. Well, so last year, so how long have you been working on BSD? Has it been a few years now?
A couple of years, yes. I've had one or two patches here and there. One of them for the MGE, so the Marvell Gigabit Ethernet interface. I seem to remember having done a little bit, one or two small patches on the NAND thing.
Okay.
But that got lost in the not enough time bin.
Sure. Yeah.
And then PF. And I now seem to be getting distracted by something I really shouldn't be touching.
That's usually where the best stories come out of.
Yeah, I'm easily distracted by shiny bugs. So I ran across one in the MS-DOSFS and looked at it and, oh, but that looks perfectly obvious why it's crashing. That should be a simple fix. You'd think I'd have learned by now.
Yes.
Turns out that I haven't. I haven't fixed it yet, so technically I still haven't touched it.
So if it's 2016 and there's a bug still in MS-DOS-FS, there's probably a reason the bugs lasted that long, right?
Yeah, well, UTF-8, multi-character encoding.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Multi-byte character encodings, mapping that, MS-DOS-FS to UTF-8. There seems to be something wrong. I still don't fully understand what the problem is, but well, that's the normal bug process, right? You're wrong, this can't possibly be broken. Oh, that's funny. This can't possibly work. Why did this ever work?
Yes. And so, getting back to PF, I guess, at FUSDEM, when you hosted the Freebsd Developer Summit, you outlined a plan for rototilling parts of PF.
Not just PF, that extends into the network stack. So for context, PF tries to deal with IPv6 fragments. It turns out that this is hard. And it's harder in IPv6 than in IPv4, mostly because in IPv4, routers along the path can refragment your packets. This doesn't happen in IPv6, so the problem happens when PF gathers up fragments, reassembles a packet, makes a filtering decision, and then needs to pass this packet along. In IPv4, you simply pass the unfragmented packet along and the rest of the stack will refragment it and everything is fine. You can't do this in IPv6 for multiple reasons, because if you did that, you risk breaking path MTU discovery. So what we need to do is we need to send out the collection of fragments, not the unfragmented packet. And the interface between the network stack and PF, netpfill, doesn't have a concept of the network stack gives us one packet and we give it a whole pile of packets in return. So what PF currently does is it figures out if the packet should be handled in the output path or in the forwarding path, and then call IP6 output or IP6 forward itself. There are many problems with this, layering violations for one thing, but another is that PF actually gets this check wrong.
Oh, okay.
That's very much my fault. But right now it's wrong. It sometimes works, and it turns out that sometimes covers most of what people use, but it's wrong, and so you end up in certain situations calling the wrong one and panicking the machines or having your packets dropped on the floor. Bad things happen. Another issue with that is that PF is occasionally called from the bridging code. So there's a feature where you can run PF on a bridge, and the way this is done is that the Ethernet header gets stripped off, and then the IP packet gets handed off to PF. The IP or the IPv6 packet, it does its processing, and when it returns the packet to the bridge, you just glue the Ethernet header back on in front of it and send it out. But if PF calls IP6 output directly, you end up with a packet going without a header where it should have a header, and that just also completely breaks. So the general idea, and unfortunately I've not found the time to start on this, but the idea is there at least, is to teach netpfill, the interface between the network stack and PF, that sometimes the network stack will hand us one packet and will give you a whole pile in return. And then the network stack needs to be taught that if you have all of these packets, continue processing them as you would this one packet. So, big job, but it should fix a number of outstanding PF issues.
Interesting. So is this all related to FreeBSD's PF? Is this been fixed upstream in OpenBSD?
Yes. So what OpenBSD does in that situation is they also have the bit where they output, call IP6 output or IP6 forward from PF. but their network stack tells PF if this is an output or a forward packet.
Okay.
So they don't have to guess and they don't get it wrong.
Sure.
Which fixes a number of the problems. I actually haven't checked what they do with the PF on the bridge. It's possible that they don't support this at all. I actually haven't looked at it.
Okay.
And so you said it changes the net pfill interface, and that interface is to support multiple firewalls.
Yes.
How does this change impact other firewalls?
Hopefully it shouldn't. So the change should be allow this to happen.
Right.
So a whole collection of packets could be just one packet or none, which is something that NetPFill already supports. So it should be fine for other firewalls. I'm hoping to get this done before somebody gets around to looking at IPv6 fragmentation in IPFW, because I think it would be useful for them as well.
Sure.
Right.
Kind of pre-solve the problem.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're going to run into the same problem, I
They
imagine.
are very likely going to run into the same problem.
And if we can use the same solution in both cases,
That would
that's
be ideal, yes.
That's great.
So you mentioned you also work on embedded systems.
Yes.
Have you done anything else with that with BSD?
A tiny little bit. So I have an OpenRD board, one of the Marvell chipped boards at home that I keep meaning to play with. I once looked at it in the context of the NANDFS thing, but unfortunately I've not had the time. I keep meaning to try to use the FreeBSD Wi-Fi build, is what I think it's called, to make a build for the OpenRD board, because it's the last remaining Linux system in my house. I have one, actually, that you helped me buy, one of the TP-Link access points running FreeBSD. That works rather well. I occasionally update it, and sometimes I get lucky and it breaks, and then I have something else to look at.
Yay. That's really cool. So is that one of the ones you guys hacked at BSDCan?
Yes,
Okay.
it's fun. It's running multiple access points, so it's a guest access point, which just gets routed out to the internet and can't access the rest of my network.
Okay.
And it's an IPv6 only access point, which is fun to test things.
Oh, that's cool.
Many devices actually just work in IPv6, so everybody should be using IPv6 now.
Ironically, I just turned it off at the house because we've been using a bridge for a long time and it was slow. Because certain things like the phones were wanting to hit the IPv6 first, and the round trip to Hurricane Electric sucked.
Oh yeah, yes. Well,
Tunnel worker.
yeah. I know them. I actually use them on my on the access point as well.
Yep.
For reasons.
I have them native.
Yes.
Yeah, rub it in.
I do actually
Charter's
have.
promising me by the end of the year we have native.
I actually have native IPv6 access at home. It's really nice.
Yeah.
Well, what I was going to say is Happy Eyeballs should fix that. So there's an RFC for it, where your client is supposed to try to send out an IPv6 and an IPv4 request at more or less the same time.
Interesting. Okay.
Actually, the spec says that it should send out the v6 request first, and then, if I recall correctly, 25 milliseconds later, the IPv4 response, and then use whoever responds first.
Okay.
So use IPv6 unless it's sufficiently slower.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Seems like a
That
good
seems like a
standard.
good idea, but I think it's mostly implemented in web browsers.
Sure.
Well, that's one of the first places.
Yeah, that's 95% of the work right there.
It turns out that if you turn on IPv6, a lot of traffic uses it, because some of the major services, the Facebooks and the Googles of the world, do offer dual stack services. So in
Because a
Belgium,
lot of phones are V6 only now.
in the US certainly, yes. I mostly know about Belgium. So the main ISPs in Belgium are all dual stack, and something like 40% of all internet traffic in Belgium is IPv6.
Oh, really? Okay. That's pretty darn
It's
high.
very impressive,
Yeah.
and it mostly just works. Very few complaints.
Is there any other areas of FreeBSD where IPv6 could use more work?
I'm sure there are, but I can't think of any offhand.
Well,
Certainly in PF, there are still things to look at.
Sure. I know we did that IPv6 only build years back, where I helped do some builds of PCBSD with that. The first ones out there that was IPv6 only stack. And Yeah, it'd be interesting to maybe revisit that and see what breaks again.
We should talk to Bjorn. I remember that he did those. It would be fun
Seems
to
like
try
we should
those
have
again.
a Jenkins that just does that every day.
We should, yeah.
Yes, because people go and
I'm
change
thinking even up
PF
the,
and
I'm
break.
thinking up the stack, like packages, like, what in the package tree breaks? Like,
Yes.
that'd be interesting.
I remember Varnish used to break if you had no IP stack at all. We tried to build it in a Red Sports jail, which had no network at all.
Oh.
The configure script would be like, what are you doing? You can't have Varnish and no network stack.
That makes no sense.
Yeah, well, it makes sense to build it that
Right.
way. It doesn't make sense to use it that way. It would be interesting. Some people, occasionally change things in the network stack, and it's very easy to miss that this doesn't build if you don't have IPv4. Because who doesn't?
Yeah.
I'm not sufficiently familiar with the packaging system, but I remember people complaining that you can't actually build all ports if you only have v6,
Okay.
because not everything
mirrors.
is hosted on dual stack systems.
There was a thread about that, about making sure that copies of those disk files were on the FreeBSD mirrors, which did have
Yes.
v6 access.
Yeah, the disk cache.
Yeah. That makes sense. Well, cool. Anything else you want to tell us about, or you have any other questions on?
Do you have anything else?
I think that's all I can think of.
And you want to tell the story of how you broke my router?
Oh, I want to, but I can't actually remember the exact details.
So it was while you were working on the fragmentation code.
While I was working on IPv6 fragmentation code.
And so on my internet-facing interface, I have an oddball MTU. It's like 4,400 bytes. And then on the actual inside of the LAN that it would be forwarding packets to the router, it was only the standard 1,500.
Yes.
And
It's
code
been
was
too
trying
long.
to
No,
reassemble
I
them.
think the problem was that you were doing scrubbing in both directions. So what wound up happening is that the packets come in on the incoming interface, we gather them all up, we reassemble the packet, we make a filtering decision based on that. We pass it along in the stack, we pass all the fragments along in the stack, and then on the outbound interface, we gather them all up again. Reassemble the packets, and I don't remember what the exact trigger for the problem was there, but it wound up looping somewhere and panicking the box.
Oh yeah, I think it recursion.
Yeah, I think. Yes, what wound up happening is that the individual fragments got re-injected in the stack and gathered up again, reassembled, filtered on, and then individually passed on into the stack again, gathered up again, and then eventually you run out of stack and things go boom.
That's right.
And then the packets don't flow.
And then the packets don't flow, and Allan is very unhappy.
Yes, for sure.
Fortunately, we could work around that one, I think, by just scrubbing in one direction. It's arguably not terribly important to scrub on the way out, because surely we can be trusted.
That's right. That's right. Well, great. Well, hey, thanks for taking the time to sit with us today at BSDCan, and we'll check in with you in the future and see what other fires you've put out.
Yes, keep my feet to the fire, because it's easy to get distracted by, ooh, shiny.
That's right. That's right. Cool. Well, thank you again. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, we're back. Hope you guys enjoyed the interview, and it's always exciting to see the stuff happening with PF and firewalls in general on the BSD, so good stuff. So before we go into the news roundup, of course, it's time for our next sponsor this week, which is going to be DigitalOcean, and the website for that. Come on, it's fairly obvious, but digitalocean.com. You'll want to go there and create an account right away. Don't wait. You want to try this out because this is just really cool stuff. But when you create your new account, don't forget to use the coupon code FreeBSD Now, which is going to give you that $10 credit so you can run basically 2 months of their lower end VM, which for a low end VM, it's actually pretty not bad. It's we're talking SSDs, a terabyte of transfer a month. Come on, for $5 a month, really? That's pretty cool. And of course, data centers all around the world, which you can help yourself pick by going to their website and using their nice bandwidth calculators and latency measurements and all that right on the website. And you can see, I want to use New York, or no, maybe I want to do London for this or something. But definitely take a look. I think, what's the other one now? Toronto, they've just added, and
Seattle,
Singapore.
San Francisco, Toronto, New York, London, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, and Singapore.
That's right, with India on the way.
I think
So,
Bangalore
a new
is
one.
that one.
Right? So, I mean, they have a lot of different options to choose from. So, of course, what's really cool about DigitalOcean is recently, well, I guess it's not so recently now. Gosh, what's it been? Year and a half now? 2 years since they did this? But they've added FreeBSD support. So if you'd like to spin up a FreeBSD VM, you can do that right away. And I know they're still working on maybe even VMs with Zfs in it, which will be very cool. I might have to switch mine over.
Yeah, and they have this super easy to use control panel. It's really fast and easy. And they even have videos about it. It's so easy. I don't think you need those, but they're there. But they do have some cool videos on some of the more advanced features, like they have one-click applications. But interesting one is floating IP addresses. So you can get a static IP address that you can move between your different VMs. So each VM has its own IP address, but then in an almost CARP-like style, but across racks and different switches and so on. So it's one level higher in the networking, one hop further away in networking version of CARP, basically. So you can actually move the IP address that you actually host your website on between multiple virtual machines, while each one still has its individual IP address for you to administrate. Great for upgrades or failover or whatever, And one feature that really lets you know that this is production ready is they have team accounts, so that you can let multiple people have access to do stuff with the VMs, all under one billing account. They have the idea that not everybody who's doing this is just doing it for themselves. If you're going to do this for work, you need team accounts because sharing passwords is bad. So they have that, which is great.
Yeah, just a lot of good stuff. They're definitely enterprise ready. So check them out today. And of course, if you talk to anyone over there, tell them you heard about it here on BSD Now. I know we would appreciate that. Okay, so into the news roundup. So, of course, we've had Allan's work to bring support for Jelly over to GPT, BIOS, and Zfs boots. So we've talked about that for a while now.
Yeah.
But, of course, the missing piece has been support for EFI.
Yeah, and I was hoping to get to that in time to talk about it at BSDCan, but I didn't. And
okay.
I don't really, I don't really know anything about EFI, and it would have been a lot of work. So I'm really glad that someone else did it for me.
That's right. So Eric McCorkle actually made that easy for you, Allan. You don't have to do that part now. So that's great.
He's the one that got ZFS working in EFI and did most of the work for that. So definitely qualified to do this.
Definitely. So we actually have a link to a blog entry he wrote with, of course, all the relevant GitHub links if you want to find the code and try it out. But he introduces us to his work to bring Jelly encryption support to EFI. So first up, before we get started, the bad news. He says this will not make it into 11.0. I guess it's too much of a refactor and it's too late, too much too late. But, maybe PCBSD to be determined.
Sure.
I'm going to keep an eye on it and see if maybe we'll pull it in.
The interesting thing is I think it's contained enough that in the future you would just be able to grab the EFI binary thing, the actual blob that goes in the ESP file directory from head once this is done and drop it on your existing 11.0 system and not have to change everything else. Although I think one of the other interesting things he did was a better way of passing the Jelly keys from the loader into the kernel. So that might actually require some kernel side changes. But definitely glad to see this happening.
Okay. But anyway, it's definitely looks like it's ready to be tried around or tried out and played with. But he explains why this is more than just a new feature, though, but it's an actual refactor of the EFI boot code, why he's probably hesitant to put it in 11.0. But here's some of what he wrote about it in the blog. He said, I've already written extensively about my EFI refactoring here, and he has another link. He said, the reason for undertaking this effort, however, was driven by Jelly support. Early in my work on this, I had implemented a non-EFI providers framework in Boot 1 in order to support the notion of disk partitions that may contain subpartitions. He said, this was deeply unsatisfying to me for several reasons. He said, it implemented a lot of the same functionality that already exists in the EFI framework. It involved implementing a GPT partition driver to deal with partition tables inside Jelly partitions. And he said GPT detection support is already guaranteed by the EFI spec. He said the interface between EFI framework and the custom providers framework was awkward, and the driver was completely Boot 1 specific, and exporting it to something like Grub would probably involve a total rewrite. So he said implementing it within the loader was going to involve a lot of code duplication, and there was no obvious way to pass keys between boot 1 loader and the kernel. So obviously he had some things that were concerning to him as he started doing this update. But he said with all those issues known, he said now he's pretty pleased with the results of the conversion so far. He said, number one, the Jelly driver can now be extracted from the FreeBSD code base without too much trouble. That's really good that it's portable. Maybe we'll see it land in Grub and other places where they could use an updated one. He said, while I was unable to go all the way to the EFI driver model, he said the only blocker is the Bcache code. Once that's resolved, we can have hot plug support in the bootloader. Very fancy, very, very fancy. He said also, the boot 1 and loader code bases are now sharing all the backend drivers, and boot 1 has been reduced to one very small source file. So that's excellent. So changes you make in one apply to the others. So that's good stuff. But all in all, I mean, it's actually a really technical, detailed blog post. He goes into quite a lot of depth on how he did this. So an interesting read if you're interested in UEFI or looking forward to playing with it. Definitely check that out when you get some time, because there's a lot of good information in there. Okay, so next up, of course, on this edition of the Faces of FreeBSD, Michael W. Lucas tells us the story of how he got started with FreeBSD. So, of course, we'll have the link to that in the show notes. You have to go click it out because it's actually quite good.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil the funny story.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it all, but after an amusing retelling of his childhood and the words Purina Monkey Chow were mentioned, he then tells us how he got into BSD. So if that didn't make you curious right there, I mean... So you got to go check it out. But his being thrown into the project may sound like a familiar story to many. He said, I came in at 11 p.m. one night and was told, the DNS administrator just walked out the door. You're the new lead DNS administrator. Make those servers work. Good luck. I think other people have those similar stories too. But that's always an interesting way.
Very often how the junior sysadmin becomes the senior sysadmin.
That's right. That's right. He's done. But from there, because, Michael W. Lucas being Michael W. Lucas, and because he wanted more sleep, he began ripping out the systems that had been failing and waking him up at night. So, of course, goodbye Unixware, goodbye Solaris, hello BSD. This is a really amusing read, though. Michael W. Lucas, definitely a good writer, so go check that out. Yeah, very good at storytelling. You need to go take a look at it. There's some funny stuff in there. And then, of course, you can bug him about it when you see him in Canada here in the near future. Okay. So next up, high availability with Postgres on FreeBSD. So tell us about that, Allan.
Yeah, so this is a talk by Sean Chittenden, who we've talked to before, back in episode 95. That was a while ago now. It was like just after BSDCan last year, But anyway, he explains how to set up a multi-data center high availability for Postgres using Console, which is this cool application he told me about last year at BSDCan. So he goes into how Console works, how it has elections between your different nodes and has a gossip protocol. But basically, it has internally a little DNS server and updates the records automatically based on that gossip protocol. So in this setup, he actually does a demo at the very beginning of his slides before getting into the details, where he's got two Postgres, a Postgres leader and a follower in his primary data center, and a second follower in a backup data center. And you look up the DNS and you see the IP address of the database server. And as you start shutting them down, the DNS records update instantly and start pointing to the local follower. And then when that's down, the remote follower. And basically keep the database up the whole time. And then he goes into how to actually set it up with tags so that you can do this with like multiple databases and automatically make sure that you're connecting to the right server and lots of cool stuff. It talks about the pros and cons of using DNS for failover like that and some of the other approaches that are used. But he walks through all the implementation details, has example configuration, everything you need to get started.
Nice.
Yeah,
definitely some good stuff. Yeah, Sean's good. He's a good one to talk to or hear from.
Yes,
so it's neat to see another video
Lots
here.
of good production stories.
Definitely. Okay, so as a follow-up to last week, we had, of course, the breaking news that FreeBSD actually was growing a modern graphics stack. So we still need users to help test the Linux kernel 4.6 DRM update to FreeBSD's graphics stack, and we have a link now to bsddesktop.com/images, and there's a test image you can download there. Write it to a USB stick and boot from it. And the cool thing is it's actually not an installer. It's not going to modify your system. It just runs off the USB drive. And it's primarily not for you to replace, your existing setup or whatever, but just to test the new updated drivers without having to grab a development branch and build it on your device, blah, blah, blah. So definitely a convenient way for you to try this out and report back failures to Matt Macy, who we talked to last week, because he's very eager to get all these things fixed up, and hopefully this will get merged in here in the near future.
Yeah. There's also a great little script in that directory called Notebook Stats. It's a Warren Block script that gets all the details about your machine. Usually it's a laptop, but not always. And creates a little info file that you can send that has all the hardware details about your machine, so that, like Matt said, there were two machines that had exactly the same graphics card, but were totally different. And so this helps collect all the stats and maybe figure out, all right, this problem is only happening on machines that have this specific configuration of hardware configuration, and that will help make it easier to find the problems in the code.
Nice. Well, definitely. So nice, good debug log. It's going to help him find and fix these bugs faster. But he also pinged us on IRC with a couple updates that we're supposed to pass along, letting you know that the ATI AMD support should be coming soon.
Yes.
So if you have one of those cards and you would want to try it, keep your eyes peeled to that site.
If you were watching the interview, that was actually the main goal of this work is actually AMD, not Intel. It's just
that's just the byproduct.
Right? He's just being very nice and helping on that side too.
That's right. He said the stability's already been improving, and I've seen a lot of traffic on the list, so going back and forth and fixing bugs. He said he'll do another announcement as soon as he's had a chance to test out some of the newest Xorg bits. So again, keep an eye out.
Yeah,
hopefully some of these new things will be landing soon.
At least one of the images on here is not quite as good because of a change to C++ that happened in head that broke VLC and a couple other ports and caused their, currently in 11, I think there are no packages for KDE because VLC was broken, GNOME 3 because Opal was broken, and XFCE and Mate were both killed because of a bug in WebKit 2. So no desktop packages.
Yes.
And it was interesting. So in total, there were only about 300 failed packages and 600 blocked packages out of 26,000. So less than 2% of the ports tree, but almost everything you want on your desktop didn't work.
That is kind of true. Out of all those ports, there's the critical couple hundred that you need, right?
Yeah.
If Firefox breaks, your day's
so Firefox was still there. It was interesting that it was VLC that broke KDE because it's included in one part of the meta package, but that's a dependency of a dependency, and eventually it takes out the whole thing.
Its entire sound system depends on it in some way or another, right?
Or just, the KDE depends on KDE-multimedia, which depends on VLC. Yeah. I wonder if we can.
For a brief time, KDE even depended on GStreamer, which really killed me. That burned me up. But anyway, at least I'd rather VLC.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, good stuff. And of course, we'll bring you up-to-date information on that. So for those, I guess I'll mention it here. For those waiting for the PCBSD image for June, I know today's the 1st. Give us a few more days. I've been working with Matt on this, and we're trying to pick the exact right time when I should roll the code. But hopefully by the end of the week, you'll have something new to play with, so you can test this out on your PCBSD 11 June image, which I plan on taking on my laptop to BSDCan next week. So one way or another, we're getting this sucker updated.
I'll throw that on one of my laptops too.
Yeah, great. Well, more people, the better. I might have to bring some extra DVDs to hand out if people want to try it while we're in Canada.
None of my laptops have a DVD drive.
Okay, USB stick, fine. I'll just bring the images. You can burn it yourself. There you go.
Actually, what I'm thinking is I need to go to the store and get a couple extra USB sticks just to have.
There you go. Okay, so we're going to start wrapping up the show here for this week in just a second. We're going to get to our Beastie Bits, but really quickly, before we do, of course, our last sponsor this week is going to be TarSnap. Of course, the website for that, tarsnap.com/BSD Now. It's pretty much the only backup solution I trust at all, right? Because I can trust that they don't have access to my bits because I've never sent them the key. Matter of fact, nobody has seen my key except for me, and it was too long to remember. So you couldn't even beat it out of me if you wanted to, right? But that's the way backups are supposed to be. So without that key, you can't get the data back. It doesn't matter if it's in the cloud or where it's stored or how many times it changes VPS or whatever. you can't get the data back, and no rogue employee can get it. The author of the code can't get it. Nefarious 3-letter government agencies can't get it.
They can't force Colin to give it to you.
Yeah. So that's the way backups are supposed to be
Yes,
done,
with the
folks.
cloud, it's the only way to ensure that you can destroy the data in the cloud. Because, if you have the backup there and it's like, I need that data to not exist anymore, you just destroy the key and now no one can get it.
That's right. So that's why Tarsnap just makes that just the way it's supposed to be, and they do it properly, they do it right. And not only that, this isn't just some bare promise, right? They give you the source code. You can see the source code. You can verify it does exactly what they claimed that it does. And they even have bounties. So if you can find a bug or a typo or something wrong with it, they'll pay you some cash for finding that kind of stuff. So definitely check it out at tarsnap.com. And of course, clients for just about everything under the sun. So you can grab your clients for Windows, Linux, Mac, all the different BSDs. They had a Minix one at one point. I mean, there's just all kinds of stuff there. And of course, if you're paranoid like us, you can just compile it yourself. So you don't even have to trust that the binaries there are what they claim to be. So definitely check it out today. Super cheap, measured in pico dollars, and you only pay for the bits that you use after it's been deduplicated. So definitely check it out today and don't put it off any longer. If you're not doing backups this way, you're not doing backups. That's just the bottom line. So good to know. Okay, so let's get into the BSD bits. So what's our first one here, Alan? We have a Comfortable on the CLI series.
It's a new blog series helping especially new people that are used to the graphical interface to get used to the command line interface. So it starts walking through the beginning of, explaining what the prompt is and what all the different symbols on it mean and why it changes sometimes when you do things. And starts with, talking about the terminology and so on. And then the next week, it goes into more stuff. And it starts actually doing things when you type things. And, you type hello and it says not found. It's like, oh, well, that makes sense. There's no command called hello and other things like that. And it starts walking through it and talks about looking at man pages and other things you can do. And next week, there'll be another part. And just interesting to start looking at that and seeing what else is there.
That's a good tutorial. A lot of new employees probably need something like this, right? Because you've been on the GUI before, maybe you know a little bit of Linux, but this is how you get work done.
Even if you've done a bunch of stuff on the command line, going through this and just filling in a couple of those little holes, like what does the symbol at the beginning of the command prompt actually mean? I mean, why sometimes it's a $sign and sometimes it's a pound sign? What does that mean?
That's right.
It's like, that's actually a convention that's purposely used in the FreeBSD documentation to tell you.
Always confuses people because I'm always in the mailing list when somebody asks me a question. I actually purposely put the pound sign or the percent sign or whatever when I'm telling them what command to type. So they know, like, do this as root, do this as user. It always just goes over people's heads,
and
right?
So I think providing that little bit of background detail, which is, once you know it, you don't ever think about it again. And so when you're teaching someone, you don't think about it because it's one of those little tiny details that is just kind of tribal knowledge everybody knows, except for you. You feel like you're the only person that didn't know that. And so tutorials like this that fill in those details and are very careful not to skip over little things like that are very valuable. So I'm looking forward to the next week's post on this one.
Oh, definitely good stuff.
I hope that series keeps up.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Okay, so next up we have FreeBSD booting on the Netgate UFW,
the micro
which
firewall.
is a small, smaller than a Raspberry Pi dual port firewall.
Basically, the device I've been asking for forever. It's like, well, Raspberry Pi is kind of cool, and you could use it as a router if it had 2 good NICs instead of 1 crappy NIC. It's like, well, that NUC would be great if it had 2 NICs. And so they finally made it. So right here we have the D message of it booting. You can see it has...
what kind of NIC is it?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but it's got 512 megabytes of RAM and a Cortex A8 R3. So Cortex A8 R3 processor with a bunch of the features. And you can see it's got dual NICs that are... I think they're gigabit. Yes, they're dual gigabit NICs, and SSD card and all that stuff. And you can actually see it here booting up.
I just wasn't familiar with that device name, the CPSW 0 and 1.
I'm not sure what those are.
According to the D message, it says a 3-port switch. So I wonder if they could have even.
Well, no, I think it's a 3-port switch, and the one port goes into the CPU, and then the other
Oh, okay.
So interesting thing about that is it probably means it can do bypass. So during a reboot or something, you can actually pass traffic between the two ports, so that basically when the firewall's off, it will default to passing all traffic. So at least your device isn't down while the firewall reboots, which could be very interesting. But yeah, I guess that's why it shows up as CPSW, is because it's actually a switch device, not a regular NIC. So yeah, here we have a picture of it with also a full-size SD card and a BeagleBone Black in a case for size comparison. You can see, compared to a regular full-size SD card, it's really not that big.
Yeah.
It's like the size of maybe 4 SD cards in total. It's got the nice barrel power connector instead of trying to get power off USB and that little fiddly connector that feels like it's going to break off at any time.
Sure.
Although right beside that, you can see it actually has the header type. So if you're going to build it into something, it can have the clip-on, like case fans have in when you're plugging into a motherboard. It's got Gpio.
Looks like it is. Yeah, it looks like it has 2 of them.
Yes,
in USBs there too, just looking at the
one of them
picture.
is a serial port.
Okay.
And then the other one, I don't know if it's for Power 2 or just for actual USB connectivity. And then you got the cell phone style fold-away SD card slot. So it takes up less space, and so your card isn't sticking out the end like it does on a Raspberry Pi 2. And then you got your 2 beefy gigabit NICs. And yeah, that's nice and small.
Nice.
And then when he was showing that off in the chat room last night, somebody asked him to run OpenSSL speed on it to give you some performance benchmarks. Although note, this has witness and all the debugging stuff. So this is a FreeBSD 11 debugging kernel, so it'll be slower than a production one. But you can see, how fast it is at, say, SHA 512. It can do 176,000 SHA 512s of 64 bytes of data at a time in 3 seconds.
Sure.
But you could
cool.
run the same test on Raspberry Pi and compare and see, relative to a Pi, how much CPU performance does this have. But the big thing is the good NICs with the switch doing most of the work means it will actually be able to route a good amount of traffic. So I'm looking forward to playing with that a little bit.
Cool. Yeah, looking forward to seeing some of those. I imagine we might see one maybe in person next week in Canada. Some of these might be floating around. So another reason to hang out in the Hacker Lounge afterwards, folks. That's where all the cool little devices get pulled out. It's like drug dealers, like, hey, have you seen one of these? Anyway, good. No, I'm not comparing what we do there to nefarious activities, but I'm just saying it's really cool. When somebody breaks out the soldering gun, you're in for a good time. That's what happened last year with you guys, Alan.
Sadly, Sean won't be there this year.
Oh, bummer. But no, definitely good stuff. So check it out and let us know if you get your hands on one, what you think. Okay, so it's actually time to wrap up the show for today, folks. We're a little bit shorter today because we're doing a double episode. We got an episode we got to prepare for next week, so we don't leave you hanging with nothing for the week while we're gone.
We saved all the questions for the next episode so that you'll have a full show next week instead of just part of one.
That's right. So, of course, stay tuned for that, and we'll be back shortly after BSDCan with all of our details and let you know how that went, of course, and make you really jealous that you didn't get to go if you weren't there. But if you were, then that was awesome. We'll look forward to seeing you and hanging out. So anyway, as we wrap up the show this week, of course, feedback at bsdnow.tv. That's the only address we really care about or monitor. So send everything there, your questions, comments, if you have a show idea or topic, or while we're out of town. I know we're going to be talking about BSD all week, but there's still news that happens around the internet. So maybe send us stories while we're gone. So when we get back, there might be things we might have missed otherwise. So send that over to us so we can make sure it gets into a future episode of BSD Now. And of course, if you have questions, send it over there and we'll get them queued up and hopefully get them into a future episode as soon as possible. And of course, don't post. You can tweet us if you'd like or whatever, but don't assume that's going to get seen and get put on the air. So try and send it to feedback at bsdnow.tv. And we'll look forward to talking to you same time next week and looking forward to seeing some of you guys in Canada.